Welcome back to another episode of the North Star Takes podcast. I'm Bailey Palicki. He's Jacob Liberta. We're a Minnesota sports podcast, so if you're a Minnesota sports fan or sports fan in general, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like if you're a Minnesota Vikings fan. We're going to continue our little mini coaching series as we go over Minnesota Vikings head coaching candidates. Today we're going to talk about Raheem Morris, defensive coordinator currently for the Los Angeles Rams. He's been all over the league, really, as a coach on both sides of the ball. He's been with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Obviously, he took over with when John Gruden was fired from there. He's been with the Atlanta Falcons when they had a prolific offense back in their Super Bowl run. So, I mean, what are your initial thoughts on Raheem Morris? Kind of an out of the blue name that we've heard here over the last couple of days, but all of a sudden, he's getting tons of hype between people who cover the Vikings and his Vikings Twitter at large.
Yeah, for sure. I think he's a quickly rising candidate, and I think he's got the experience and background to back it up, though, when you really sit there and think about it. Like, I know people have their initial thoughts and reservations when those who've been football fans here for a decade plus know, like you mentioned, he was the head coach there in Tampa after John Gruden left, and that was kind of a disaster. They had the one good season there in 2010 when they went 10-6, but overall the stint wasn't great. But then you got to consider the context of that team didn't spend any money on their roster, so I think that's obviously not going to help matters and help you win ball games. So I think he was just kind of a scapegoat there for a few years while ownership there saved some money, and then he got cast aside, and then he kind of found himself again in Washington, DB's coach. He worked with some now looking back on it, some great head coaches, because obviously Mike Shanahan, pretty legendary in his own right, and then all the assistants there from Sean McVay to Matt LaFleur to Kyle Shanahan. Like that's a lot of good coaches to work with. And then you consider him moving on to Atlanta with LaFleur and Kyle Shanahan and going to being a part of that offensive room after that, because then they made him the wide receivers coach. There's a great story on it. You should, if you haven't heard about it, definitely look it up. But became the wide receivers coach because he was a good fit. Became passing game coordinator. They had number one offense in 2016. When it was Super Bowl, everybody knows the 25-point blown lead, but that should have been a Super Bowl win. So that's huge. And then eventually gets to the point last year where he's a defensive coordinator again, and then takes over as interim head coach. Does a good job getting the most out of Atlanta. I thought the second half of last season, they were not a good team. And then this year he's doing some good things with the Rams. They got guys like Jalen Ramsey beating the drum for him. So I think that's highly encouraging, and I think I'm feeling pretty good about this idea, and this. I love that we are expressing interest in interviewing him.
Yeah, same, because it's fascinating to me that this guy has coached on both sides of the ball throughout his entire career in the NFL. Like
unprecedented.
People's gut reaction right off the bat was, "Oh no, like we're going to interview another defensive guy," but he's not a strictly defensive guy. He knows his offense, and there's articles where he's quoted as saying, he knows what it takes to be the head coach of a team. He knows the importance of being able to, support the entire team, basically be the CEO of a company is how he described it, which that's exactly what you want out of a head coach. And that's what the Minnesota Vikings need, considering Mike Zimmer only cared about the defensive side of the ball. So if you can get a guy that just kind of takes a holistic approach to the whole roster and can evaluate it from an honest perspective and not have a bias towards the defense in terms of spending money and assets and stuff like that. And, pair that with a, forward-thinking GM as well. I think it could be a match made in heaven, obviously depending on who the GM hire is going to be. But he's a very intriguing candidate that I really didn't have any thoughts about until his name had come up here that the Vikings are going to interview him. But very intriguing, I think, and I kind of like the fact that he's been a head coach before, too. I know we've talked about guys like Dan Quinn and Todd Bowles. Granted, they're older, and those guys are defensive guys. Like, they've been defensive guys their whole career in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
And, Raheem Morris is just different, I think, because he's got a little head coaching experience. He's got some interim experience, but he's also been a coach on both sides of the ball. Obviously, players respect him. You mentioned Jalen Ramsey shouting him out. Mike Tomlin as well, who – he's not currently employed by Mike Tomlin, and Mike Tomlin basically came out and said this dude is an amazingly quick learner. He's a great coach, and people respect him. So he's a very, very exciting candidate for me. And if we don't end up, talking to a Byron Leftwich or an Eric Bieniemy or Doug Peterson, I'd say he's for sure at the top of my list as it currently stands right now.
Yeah, for sure. I think with all the names that have been identified publicly that the Vikings have submitted interview requests with the league for, I think Raheem Morris has got to top the list. I think there's a a lot of strengths to his background and his experience and what he could bring to this organization. So it's hard to argue that he'd be. I think he'd be a great next head coach of this team. At least it appears that way on the surface. I mean, obviously, we could look back on this and it would look like a disaster, but at the same
Right.
time, I think he's definitely worth taking a shot at.
Absolutely. So, is there any cause for concern for you when it comes to him?
You know, I think it's just hopefully he's ready the second time around because I think anybody can have some high praise around the league. I think I've seen this before. I mean, heck, when we had Leslie Frazier, the locker room, I think loved him, but the thing
Yeah.
was that we didn't really get that much out of that. So that would kind of scare me a little bit. That it's just like guys pumping up their buddy, their good friend Raheem. So
Hmm.
I think that would probably scare me. But really, I think with all the things I've heard, it's more than that. So I wouldn't be too worried about this hire. I think I get pretty excited about it, and I think any of these guys we should give a chance to, but especially
Yeah.
with Morris, I think he definitely sounds like he's got a clear understanding of what it takes to be successful in this league. So I think I'm all for it. But yeah, I think the concern would just be if his friends are just pumping his tires.
Exactly. And I'd say really my only concern would be just who exactly he hires as his coordinators,
Yeah,
which you could make
true.
that case for any coach, but you say you hire like a true offensive guy that's going to call the plays,
Mhm.
then you don't maybe have to worry about the offensive coordinator as much. But if a guy like Raheem Morris is going to take, the CEO type approach to a roster and really delegate play calling to both coordinators, then it'd be a little bit of a concern just to see who he brings in. Obviously, depending who the names are, that could completely change my thinking. But
Mhm.
um, yeah, it would just be interesting to see that, I guess. But I mean, outside of that, I think I'd be all for giving the green light to hire this guy.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, I'm really liking this more and more. We talk about it.
Same. I think maybe we're getting a little restless too. We're just ready to have a coach. But quickly before we
Yes.
go, scale of 1 to 10, where does Raheem Morris rank for you?
Ooh, I got to give him a solid 9, I think. I don't think there's a such thing as a 10 and a perfect candidate, but I think he's pretty close to it from what I've heard these last few days and all the steam from everywhere as far as the really the praise he's getting from people he knows around the league and then just the background itself. And I keep stressing that I think it has all the makings of a successful second time around for him as a head coach.
Absolutely. I'm with you. I'm around an 8.5 more so, but I mean, he's definitely the highest of all the coaches that we've, requested interview or interviewed so far. He's definitely at the top of the list. And I think really, honestly, the only guy that could probably for sure take him over is Byron Leftwich. He's still probably my number one. But, outside of that, like I'm pretty impressed with his resume. So
Mm-hmm.
we'll see what comes of it. We'll see who the GM is. Obviously, that announcement should be coming, hopefully earlier next week, and we'll figure it out from there. So that's going to do it for this edition of the North Star Takes podcast. Please be sure to hit the like button on this video and subscribe to the channel as well. Give us a follow on both Twitter and Instagram and leave your comments below. What are your thoughts on Raheem Morris? Do you think he's just getting overhyped? Are you excited about his potential as a head coach again? So let us know your thoughts below and stay tuned for our next video on Vikings head coaching candidates. Thanks for watching.